Good evening, comrades, or good afternoon, depending on what part of the country you're in. My name is Carl Wood. I'm the presenter for this session tonight, and we're going to be delving into something that's really central to Marxism, which is political economy. I'm going to try to give a little background on why we study political economy and what its importance is. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that before we really dig into the substance of the presentation. As most people probably know, Marxism covers a lot of territory. In his essay on the three sources and three component parts of Marxism, Lenin identified three areas. One was philosophy, another was economics, and the third was socialism. And in terms of what Marx's own approach was, he was trained as a philosopher. That's what he got his doctorate in. And of course, he was an organizer for socialism and for pulling the working class together. But he spent most of his life focusing on political economy. And while he published thousands and thousands of pages of work, the real central part of his life's work was the three-volume book Capital, of which he completed the first volume in his lifetime. The second two volumes were completed and filled out by his collaborator, Friedrich Engels. And what we're going to be getting into is obviously something as comprehensive and as broad as the area of political economy and Marxism. It's not possible to cover that in one session of an hour and a half, or for that matter, two sessions of an hour and a half, if you count the second session we're doing this week. But I want to hit a couple of key concepts. So I'm going to wait just a couple of minutes so that attendees can arrive and get ready for the formal presentation. And then we'll delve into it. While we're waiting, let me give a little bit of my own background. I'm an old guy, I'm 75 years old, and I've been in the movement really all of my life. My parents met through the Communist Party, and so I'm a classic red diaper baby. But being born into the movement doesn't make you part of it. That's a choice that each of us has to make. And I chose in my early adulthood or late teenagerhood, I guess, that I would be part of this movement. And I've been active in the politics of working for a transition to socialism my entire adolescent and adult life. I've worked for about 10 years in steel mills as and became an industrial electrician. And after my job went away in that industry, and much of the steel industry went belly up in this country, I was fortunately able to get into another industry, into the electrical generation industry, where I became not just a union member, but an active trade unionist, head of a 2,000 member local for about a dozen years, and a member of the national executive board of my union. Since then, I've worked, I was actually served as a state official for about 6 years, and in the utility area, and also worked until my retirement a few years ago as a staff representative for the Utility Workers Union. So a lot of the focus of my activity in my lifetime has been around the trade union movement, although I've also been very active in struggles for equality and struggles for peace and other areas of progressive social activity. With that introduction, let's start into the substance of the presentation tonight. First of all, why do we study Marxist political economy? Well, we live in a society in which social injustice is the rule. It's not the exception. In our capitalist economy, the idea of equality, while it's a legal doctrine, it's really a sham. A tiny fraction of the population, the super rich, control and own the great majority of productive assets. In this context, there are two what are considered official or acceptable alternatives in the political realm. One is conservatism, which holds that people exist to serve the market economy, and liberalism, including social democracy or what's called moderate socialism, which seeks to improve things gradually, but within the capitalist system. Both of these approaches accept inequality and injustice as normal and inevitable. That's a reality that Marx recognized, and before Marx recognized it, it's probably something that lots of workers understood. And the working class needs its own alternative, and that's what Marx's great contribution was, is to present the working class with a scientifically based alternative for structuring the economy and the rest of society. So what is Marxist political economy? A formal definition is that political economy is the study of relations between people in the process of production and exchange. Capitalist economists treat it as if the political economy was the study of what happens with goods and services, how they're traded, what happens with money. And Marx recognized that at the bottom of all of that was the relations between people in the process of production and exchange. Now, Marx wasn't the first one to come up with a lot of these ideas, because as capitalism came to dominate the economy of the first great capitalist power, that was Great Britain, economists like Adam Smith, and after him, David Ricardo, sought to understand and explain the workings of this new system. They wanted to understand that they weren't opposed to it. They wanted to understand it and make it work better. Although they supported capitalism, they introduced the idea that labor is the source of all new value. So that isn't something that Karl Marx invented. That's an idea that was developed by capitalist economists, notably Adam Smith and David Ricardo. And actually, by the middle of the 19th century, it was pretty universally accepted in society. That there's a famous quote from Abraham Lincoln explicitly recognizing that labor is the source of all value. And so even among a bourgeois, a progressive but bourgeois politician like Abraham Lincoln, the importance of labor in the development of the economy was recognized. And so in the context of the political upheaval spearheaded by the rapidly growing working class, because the middle of the 19th century saw this tremendous growth of industry, and along with that, the people who worked in industry, the working class. And Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels built on the foundation of these bourgeois thinkers to create a truly scientific theory of economics in the service of the working class. Ricardo and Adam Smith weren't really working on behalf of the working class. They were trying to explain their own system to the capitalists themselves. Marx and Engels worked to build an intellectual foundation that the working class could use to promote its own liberation. Since, as I said, around the middle of the 19th century, the idea that labor was the source of all value was widely accepted. But as capitalism became more mature and especially as the working class started getting organizing and started presenting the possibility of alternatives to capitalism. Capitalist economists recognized that the recognition of the labor theory of value was a real challenge to the legitimacy of capitalism, because it implies that value is being produced by one group of people and taken away and secured for their own use by another group of people. And so capitalist economics and capitalist economists came to become a conscious instrument of the exploiting class in its attack against the workers. And Victor Perlo, who was a Communist Party member and a great economist, an American economist, made the statement that capitalist economics has become the conscious instrument of the exploiting class in its attack against the workers. It provides theories, so-called, to support capitalist positions in opposition to the workers' demands. Well, that's a communist viewpoint. What do the capitalists have to say about that? Well, actually, you don't hear very many of them acknowledging that that's what's going on. But many of you perhaps have heard of the famous University of Chicago School of Economics, which is perhaps the leading economic think tank for especially the conservative part of the bourgeoisie in the United States. And at the time of its founding, the first president of the University of Chicago once remarked, "It's all very well to sympathize with the working man, but we got our money from the other side and we can't afford to offend them." So I think, you know, sometimes hearing it from the horse's mouth really reveals a lot. And that comment to me is tremendously revealing. So during this class, we're going to go through a lot of different things, but I would hope that people will come away with really three basic takeaways. And so if you can try to maybe kind of keep this in mind while we're going through this, and then I'll review it at the end. I don't expect, nobody could expect everybody to remember everything that happens in this class, but these are three very important concepts that are pretty central to the understanding of Marxist economics. First of all, what is a commodity? And second, what is the cycle of capitalist production? And third, what is exploitation? So these are three things that I would like to give some attention to and come back to them at the end. Let's start with what capitalism is. Most of us know what I think has now become generally accepted through society, although it wasn't always accepted this way, but that society, since the evolution of the human race and the development of human societies beyond the tribal stage, there have been different forms of organization of human society. And we generally recognize that there was a period of widespread slavery that resulted from groups of people conquering other groups of people, and then the establishment of monarchies or empires on the basis of that. That was succeeded by the development of feudalism, and out of feudalism came capitalism. And I think it's pretty widely accepted that that is the order in which human history has evolved since the development of the first-class societies. Capitalism is a historically evolved stage of human society, and it's characterized by, first of all, concentration of wealth in the hands of a few people who own the means of production. Now, what are the means of production? The means of production can be land, they can be tools and implements. In the modern world, in the 21st century, they can also include things like software. And as well as all sorts of advanced technological processes. These means of production are concentrated in the hands of just a few people. And as time has gone on, it seemed like in the late 19th century, when we had the robber barons and industrialists like Andrew Carnegie and financiers like J.P. Morgan, that there was tremendous concentration of wealth. But in today's world, the concentration is maybe 1,000 times greater than that. Instead of millionaires and multimillionaires, we have multi-billionaires. And it's not just the reduced value of each dollar that has created this concentration. It's the fact that the amount of wealth is greatly increased because of the tremendous productivity of modern society and modern technology. In this society, the great majority of the population has no means of getting their living except by selling their power, their ability to work for wages. And probably almost everybody on this session tonight, on this call, falls into that category. Marx called this class of propertyless workers the proletariat, which is derived from a Latin word referring to the free citizens of Rome who didn't own any property. Today we call it the working class, and it's probably not a good idea to use proletariat all the time because most ordinary people don't know what it means. The working class, people have an idea what that means, although perhaps the way we define the working class is different from the way the bourgeoisie and bourgeois media describe it. And in this society, virtually all production is for exchange. That is for sale on the market, not for the personal use of the producers. This contrasts, for example, to a lot of production, say, under feudalism, where serfs and farmers produced a lot of what they produced was for their own use, or it was for use on the manner on which they lived. Didn't really enter into the market. It never made it to the marketplace. So that a village might have a few things that were exchanged. Maybe a shoemaker would make shoes, or a blacksmith would make horseshoes. But for the most part, goods were produced for the personal use of the producers or within their immediate family or community. Under capitalism, goods are produced for exchange, and they're called commodities. We'll get in a second to what a commodity is. The reason that we focus, and why I identified one of the takeaways from this session would be, what is a commodity? Excuse me. Is that the commodity itself is really central to the capitalist mode of production. The quote here from Karl Marx, the wealth of those societies in which the capitalist mode of production prevails presents itself as an immense accumulation of commodities, its unit being a single commodity. So in order to understand the capitalist mode of production, we have to understand what a commodity is. And Marx approached this in a very scientific way. He defined a commodity as having three qualities. First of all, it has a use value. That is, it must satisfy some human want. Now, there's a lot of kinds of wants. It might be something that is needed for the sustenance of life, food, for example. It might be something that is desirable or useful for aesthetic purposes. Jewelry is an example of that. Art might be another one. Most commodities are things that are actually used to satisfy some physical or emotional need of people. And so having a use value is one of the qualities of commodity. If a commodity doesn't have any use value, if it's not useful for anybody, then it can't be a commodity. Second, it's a product of human labor. There are things that are useful, but are not products of human labor. If sunshine is useful, but sunshine is not produced by human beings. Water is useful, but except, I guess, in modern society, water has to be treated so it's potable. So there's human labor involved in that. But free-flowing water that occurs in mountain streams, for example, it's a product of nature, but not of human labor. And third, it's produced for exchange, so that a product that is produced for personal or domestic or family use of the producer is not a commodity. So that, for example, a peasant farmer who raises food for his or her family, but is not taking that food to market, that isn't the purpose of raising it, they're not producing that food as commodities. They're producing it for other purposes. So these are the three key things, that it's useful, that it's a product of human labor, and that it's produced for exchange. And ultimately, the exchange value, which Marx referred to generally as just value of a commodity, is determined by the amount of labor that it's necessary for its production. And he used the term socially necessary labor to distinguish or to indicate that for the production of a given commodity, some producers might be more efficient, some might be less efficient, and so they might require more or less time to produce that commodity. But the average time within a given society, within a given technology, that is necessary is the socially necessary labor time required for its production. Long before the emergence of modern capitalism, merchant capitalists who were not involved in the production process made profits by buying and selling commodities, often transporting them from areas of abundance to areas of scarcity. Think Marco Polo, an Italian merchant who traveled to East Asia and bought commodities there and transported them back to Europe and sold them for a much higher price, then took that money, bought commodities in Europe, transported them to Asia and sold them again. There was no production that was involved in this. It was just buying and selling, trading. A lot of these merchant capitalists were also pirates on the side, so there was a lot of theft involved. That's part of the genealogy of capitalism. It goes back to piracy. But these were not productive capitalists, these were merchant capitalists. And that kind of merchant capitalism existed before modern capitalism really existed. Modern capitalism emerged probably in the early 17th century, maybe the late 16th century. And but there were merchant capitalists going back far before then. Under capitalism, though, new value is created in the process of production, not through exchange, so that Marco Polo might buy spices in Asia and bring them to Italy and sell them at much higher prices. The new value wasn't created by any production process. It was just created by buying where it's scarce and selling where buying where it's abundant and cheap and selling where it's scarce and expensive. Under capitalism, new value is created in the process of production, not through exchange. So buying low, selling high is not the way primarily that capitalists make their money. So we've indicated what is a commodity, and now we're going to talk about the second what I hope will be a takeaway from this class, which is the cycle of capitalist production, how production takes place under capitalism. And there's a formula that we use here. And I'm going to go through each of the letters in it and try to explain what they mean. The capitalist starts out with money. And that's the first M in that equation. Money is that's the money that the capitalist invests in production. And that money may be spent, for example, on land, on factories, on equipment, on raw materials, and on and of course on the use of workers or labor power. Then those are the different commodities that the capitalist buys with that money. So from money we go to C or commodities. Those go into the production process. So that let's take, since I used to work in the steel industry, I like to use that as an example. The capitalist has bought a steel mill, has bought machinery for the steel mill and buildings for the steel mill, raw materials, iron ore, coal to make coke out of, limestone, and natural gas to fuel the ovens. And of course, the capitalist has hired workers. So all of those are commodities that are produced or that are used in the production process. The workers are not generally literally used up, their labor power is used. And although tragically, sometimes they're physically used up as well. And out of this comes a new commodity. In the steel mill, the new commodity is steel in various forms, maybe sheet metal or ingots or whatever form it's will be sold on the market. And then those new commodities that are sold on the market produce a new amount of money, which if the capitalist is to stay in business is going to have to be more money than what the capitalist started with. So M prime here becomes a new amount of money. So that's the process or the production cycle under capitalism. Money is used to buy commodities for production, which enter into the production process, producing new commodities, and those are sold for a new and presumably higher amount of money. And new value is created in the production process. It's not, if all a capitalist does is buy some things cheap and sell them expensive, nothing is produced, nothing new comes out of it. The source of all real new wealth in capitalist economy is the production process. And the different commodities with which this process begins, they may include raw materials, equipment and machinery, land and buildings. All these are called constant capital because by themselves, they can't create a new commodity with a value greater than their own value. So if you buy a big pile of iron ore and you have a factory and you buy a lot of coking coal and natural gas, they can't create any new commodity with a value greater than their own value. The only thing that can transform them into something with greater value is the application of labor power, which is then called variable capital because it varies or increases the value of the commodity that's produced.